Welcome to another episode of BHP Book Club. I am your host, Kelly Morgan. Today I'm excited because Jeff Rasley has come back to talk about his 12th book. The first time we met Jeff was back in May, and he was promoting his 11th book. Well, today he is promoting his 12th book, America's Existential Crisis, Our Inherited Obligation to Native Nations. Sounds absolutely fascinating. I'm so glad that he is still a member of the book club and decided to come back and share this book. So let's just get right to it. Welcome to the book club, Jeff Rasley. Jeff, welcome back to the book club. This is your second time being on the podcast. How are you?
I'm very good, and it's glad to be with you again, Kelly. Nice to see you. Nice
to see you as well. So since the last time we talked, you had a book that came out after the show played. And so I want to talk about this book because it sounds absolutely fascinating. Tell the listeners the title of the book.
America's Existential Crisis, Our Inherited Obligation to Native Nations.
And when did this book publish, Jeff?
It came out in late May.
Late May. So tell us about it. I'm interested to find out what you did for research and what got you to write on this particular subject.
Well, thanks. Well, I was out at Wounded Knee, South Dakota, a few years ago, and I was absolutely shocked by the level of poverty in the community of Wounded Knee and on the Pine Ridge Reservation and the Rosebud Reservation, which are the two biggest reservations for the Sioux Nation. And it made me think about the comparison of the poverty here in our own nation to what I had experienced over in Nepal, and which I've written about and started a foundation over there to help alleviate poverty in the rural mountain communities, and to see it even worse right here in the USA, and of a people that have been, had their lands taken away, their people massacred. It intrigued me from an intellectual standpoint as far as why has this happened, and it also touched me personally because of the relationship of two ancestors of mine to Native Americans.
So the book is nonfiction, I'm guessing. And so what does the book talk about?
Well, it starts out telling the stories of two of my ancestors. One of them was in the massacre. Of course, from his point of view, it was a battle of Wounded Knee. He was a lieutenant in the 7th Cavalry, and he was front and center when 250 Lakota Sioux were massacred by the 7th Cavalry. And how that massacre came to happen is a really interesting story, because historians still do not agree on actually what started the battle or started the shooting. And so I have this one ancestor who was a professional soldier who spent his entire career chasing down Native Americans who had left reservations and either forcing them back onto the reservation or killing them. And I had another ancestor from northern Indiana, from my hometown, who was given a beautiful beaded deerskin vest by Potawatomi, who survived the Trail of Death, which was a forced march from northern Indiana to Oklahoma because of the laws of 1830 which forced Indians out of any territory, basically, that white people wanted to claim. And this vest was given to him because he helped those local Native Americans survive a very hard winter. So as a token of appreciation, they gave him this vest, and it passed down 5 generations to me. And so I thought these two family history stories really create an interesting starting point to talk about why did relations between white settlers and the U.S. government and Native Americans go, for the most part, one direction as opposed to the other, because the one ancestor, enforced the reservation system, which took the land away from the people who were here first, forced them into these effectively territorial prisons. And the other ancestor was a tradesman who traded with the native people, considered them his friends, and lived in peace and harmony with them. So I use those two stories as a jumping off point to try to analyze and describe the history of why the United States chose the one route rather than the other, and what could we do at this point in history. And the third section of the book is, hey, here's what we could do, excuse me, to try to make things right by helping Native communities to develop.
So what was the research like for the book? It sounds like you had to do research on your two ancestors, and then you would have to go do actual research on the Sioux Nation.
Yeah, that's right, Kelly. I learned the story of my ancestor, who has the sort of funny name of Valentine Berkey, was the one who received the vest. There are historical documents about him in archives in northern Indiana and Illinois, because he was a fairly prominent citizen. He was a city councilman and on the school board and a county surveyor, and he owned a lot of land. So there was some biographical information on him, but the story about the vest is handed down through oral history. There's no documentation of this gift to him. The story was handed down from his daughter, my great-grandmother, to her daughter, my grandmother, to her mother, to her daughter, my mom, to me. And then on the other side, there's a lot of information about the Battle of Wounded Knee, and the military records of Lieutenant James Mann were available. So I could look at his military history. But what was really interesting is Lieutenant Mann was shot in the hip the day after Wounded Knee because he was assigned to run down any of the Indians that escaped from the battle. And in the course of trying to capture some of those Indians, he was shot in the hip, and he lived for 17 days, and then he died from that wound. He probably got sepsis. But during those 17 days, he gave 2 interviews and wrote a letter. So there was an article in Harper's Weekly, this is back in 1890, and that describes his interview. And then this letter to his brother is a very long letter, which describes in very great detail what happened at Wounded Knee. Of course, it's from the point of view of the 7th Cavalry, but his letter became one of the primary sources from the U.S. government's perspective of what happened and why the U.S. considered it a battle, whereas the Sioux considered it a massacre.
So what information did you research on the Sioux Nation? I bet you that was really interesting history.
Yeah, so I did a road trip out to Wounded Knee, and at the right by the site of the massacre, when I was there, was an American Indian Movement Center, and that had been a museum run by a Sioux family, and then it was taken over by the American Indian Movement, and then it closed. The family is trying to reopen it as a museum. But when I was there, the records they had were mainly about the American Indian movement, which was actually a very fascinating movement. And one of the main things it did is they took over the village of Wounded Knee, and this was in the 1970s, and had a 65-day standoff with the FBI and the National Guard, and a few people were shot and killed during this standoff. But the AIM, American Indian Movement, wanted to draw attention to how their land had been stolen and a treaty violated, which goes back to General Custer's last stand, which was the greatest loss of life in a single battle during the Indian Wars on the side of the U.S. And after that battle, which was the high point for the Sioux, there were a whole bunch of tribes that came together under the leadership of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse to fight the 7th U.S. Cavalry. But that alliance fell apart shortly after that battle. And when that alliance broke down, the Indians lost battle after battle. Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse both surrendered, and they were each killed after they had given up. Crazy Horse's, for him, it came fairly soon after he surrendered. Sitting Bull, it was a number of years later. But in the meantime, the original treaty between the U.S. and the Sioux Nation ceded all of the Black Hills to the Sioux Nation. And General Custer violated that treaty. And he did that on purpose because essentially he was representing the mining interests, the railroad interests, commercial interests, who wanted to take over the Black Hills area, basically South and North Dakota, because gold had been discovered there. And Ulysses S. Grant was president at the time, and for a number of years he resisted, in effect, canceling that treaty, declaring war against the Sioux. But eventually he gave in because Custer became this national hero after he stupidly, with 230 men, attacked several thousand Indians under the command of Sitting Bull. And but the media turned, this was an early campaign of the media to create a hero out of a guy who was really just a very reckless battlefield commander, but it worked. And so there was all this great sympathy. We've got to avenge Custer, plus there's gold. And so the U.S. government declared that the Sioux had violated the treaty. It was canceled. They drove them out of the Black Hills and into one of the most desolate areas in the country where crops can't grow. So the Sioux over time started trying to get out of their reservations and find other places to live, or just get away from these horrible conditions. And that's what led to the Battle of Wounded Knee. It was a group of 300, a tribe of the Sioux called the Minneconjou, led by the chief that the whites called Bigfoot. His name was Spotted Elk. I can't pronounce it, how you pronounce it in the Sioux language. But his band had left the reservation. They were caught by the 7th Cavalry, and after some really just misunderstandings, while they were being disarmed, a shot was fired. Who fired that shot? Historians cannot agree. And then the U.S. cavalry opened up on them with these things called Hotchkiss guns, which are just like Gatling guns, as well as their long rifles. And this is something else historians don't agree on, exactly how many Sioux were killed. The estimates, vary from 200 to 300. So, I compromise and say 250. And they were then thrown into a mass grave. And ones that escaped, like I said, were being hunted down over the next few days. And those that survived were forced back into the Pine Ridge Reservation.
Wow, the book itself sounds fascinating, and the history is fascinating. So when you published this book, if I remember correctly, you have your own publishing company, correct?
That's correct. My wife and I are both published authors by traditional publishers, and eventually, after some bad experiences and just frustration and impatience, we decided to start our own publishing company called Midsummer Books. And we published a number of my wife Alicia and my books under that title, Midsummer Books.
So what is that like? How does somebody either, start their own publishing company, or how would they go to work with you as a publisher? Because there's a lot of authors out there who would love to work with a publisher.
There are, and so far we have not published anyone other than ourselves. We've worked with a bunch of authors for editing, coaching, helping them self-publish, but so far we haven't let anyone else use our company. It's actually pretty easy to start your own publishing company. You create a company, and we primarily use Amazon because of the Amazon self-publishing or direct publishing platform. You can just use Amazon as your primary distribution system, but you can go to bookstores yourself. It's probably not possible you're going to be able to get any other distributor other than Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I mean, Barnes & Noble is, of course, the second biggest, but very small compared to Amazon. But because Amazon and secondarily Barnes & Noble will serve as a point of sales or distribution for any book that meets their criteria, that's sort of solved the problem of, if you have your own book, either self-published or through your own publishing company, how do you sell it? How do you distribute it? Well, Amazon is the biggest seller in the world. So that's what we've done. And we've put our books in their what they call their select system, and in effect, we've given Amazon exclusive distribution rights for all of our books. There's maybe better business plans than that, but so far it's worked well enough for us. My wife had one Amazon bestseller through a traditional publisher. I had a book through a traditional publisher that sold pretty well. We have not had sales on that level through our own company, and that's primarily because we're limited to Amazon through its exclusive distribution agreement. But on the other hand, it's easier. We're in control. We don't have to wait for months and months for an agent to agree to represent us. We don't have to wait then for a year for a publisher to actually put the book out on the shelf. So that control to us is worth not selling as many.
And it's not as hard as people would think to actually start your own publishing company. I think most authors don't really know what a publisher does. And I think they're thinking that the publisher will pay for everything and then go out there and market that book for them. But a lot of publishers don't do that today. A lot of publishers simply get the book ready to be published and may even publish it for you. But the marketing relies very much on the author.
It does. And because my wife and I have been in the business for a long time, we saw this transition. 20, 30 years ago, but before the existence of Amazon, publishers would market your book. I mean, whether you were a big time name or you were a first time author, publishers actually went out and tried to sell your book. But now publishers expect the author to have a social media platform. They expect you to sell it. The last time I dealt with an agent, the agent's first question was not, what's the quality of your book? Tell me about your book. It was, what's your social media platform? How many followers do you have? And because the agents know that's what the publishers really care about. They just care about how you, the author, and the agent are going to sell your book for them. And they take by far the biggest share of the profits. And so going through Amazon, your royalty share is 3, 4, 5 times what it is with a traditional publisher. I mean, a traditional publisher, it pays a royalty between 4 and 15%. Amazon will pay 60 or 70%. So, and as I said, you're probably not going to sell nearly as many books if you self-publish through Amazon as if you have a traditional publisher, but your royalties are going to be a lot higher. If what you care about is money, if you want to work hard at marketing, you may actually make more money direct publishing rather than if you get a traditional publisher. Plus, you're in control. You can, as soon as your book is done and you're happy with it, you can get it published. You don't have to wait a year or 2 years after you're finished just to actually hold that book in your hand.
Right. And some publishers even want you to pony up money for part of the cost to get out there and market the book. I've seen that before as well, where publishers are not willing to cover all the costs. They want you to invest in the cost as well because they want you to go out there and market a little bit harder than they're willing to market.
Yeah, in fact, we've worked with a few authors that we really thought were getting ripped off by that type of publisher. I mean, no author should ever pay an agent to critique your book. No author should ever pay a publisher to sell your book. I mean, that's, we used to call those vanity presses because we knew it was just, to satisfy your vanity. They weren't real publishers. I mean, yeah, they created the book in terms of they printed it, but they weren't doing anything. In fact, one author who wrote a really wonderful book, he was a Vietnam veteran, and he came to us and we coached and edited his book about his Vietnam experience, and it was a very moving book. And he had signed a contract with a publisher that was going to charge him $4,000, and then he had to buy a bunch of the books himself, which was going to be another $1,000, something like that. I mean, he was going to be out about $5,000 to see his book in print. And so I went and I looked at this publisher's, I took their top 10 authors and went to Amazon and looked at how they were selling on Amazon. They weren't selling at all. And so in these days and time, I don't care who the publisher is and who the author is. If you're not selling at all on Amazon, you're not selling.
Yeah.
And so we I'm a lawyer. We got Bob, was his name, out of that contract canceled, and he self-published and actually did very well selling his book himself because he had all these connections through the VFW, the American Legion, all these veterans organizations. And it really makes me sad when I see a writer who's put in all that work and then gets ripped off by one of these vanity presses. Because, I mean, maybe there's some authors that have done well using a vanity press. I don't know any that have.
Yeah, me neither. I've heard horror story after horror story about using a vanity press and ponying up a lot of money and not really getting what you thought were, what you thought were going to be getting in return. And I guess really, Jeff, the bottom line is that when it comes to marketing your book and all that good stuff, you have to be willing to put on your entrepreneur hat and go out there and market it the best to your ability. Because the vanity presses will take your money, but they won't do that part for you. And you have to really do that on your own.
Yeah, that's right. And the thing about being in control is you can decide how much time and energy do you want to put into marketing. And I have a system that I use, and I'm going to do that much, and that's it. And in the books that I've written through Midsummer Books, typically will sell from 200 to 2,000 copies, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I would love to sell 1 million copies, but I'm only going to do so much at marketing because that's not what I love. I love to write.
Right.
And I'm just going to, I'll spend about 3 to at the most 6 months working on marketing a book, and there are certain things I'll do, and after that, forget it. I'm, friends of mine and contacts and people I reach out to through social media. You're aware of the book. If you want to buy it, great. And after a while, I'm going to move on and write another book because that's what I enjoy.
Well, Jeff, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for coming back and talking about this new book. It sounds wonderful. What's the title of the book again?
America's Existential Crisis, Our Obligation to Native Nations.
And when you are done working on your next masterpiece, I expect you to come back and share that with us as well.
Well, thank you, Kelly. I am well into my next masterpiece. I hope to see it out, available in a month or so.
Well, great. Then you'll have to come back and tell us all about it.
Well, I would love to. It's great talking to you. I'm glad we got to do it again.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you for listening to another episode of BHP Book Club. I have been your host, Kelly Morgan. We just wrapped up with author Jeff Rasley as he shared his 12th book with us, titled America's Existential Crisis, Our Inherited Obligation to Native Nations. It's available on Amazon. Thank you so much, Jeff, for coming back. I can't wait for you to come back and share your next book. If you are an author and you would like to promote your book and be a member of the book club, just go to brightheadpublishing.com, go to the contact section, drop me a note, we'll connect, and you could be the next author promoting their book on the podcast. I appreciate each and every one of you for listening. I couldn't do it without you. But until next time, keep writing.